Hello everyone, welcome to lesson 14 of the Take5SAT 5-week study plan. If you have made to this far, congratulations, you are at the penultimate check mark of the reading and writing curriculum. Lesson 14 today will focus on the paired passages question, also known as the cross-text connection type. Before diving into today's lesson, let's take a step back and look at the progress you have made in the reading section of the digital SAT. Because unlike the writing and math section, some reading questions are more advanced because they require you to combine skills you have already built through solving other basic questions previously. From lesson 8 to lesson 13, we have tackled the SAT reading by approaching three types of questions. First is questions focusing on the what, finding the main argument. Remember, it goes beyond just the topic, and identifying the main details or what specifically is said about this detail. These are the more straightforward questions. All you need to do is locate the main argument by combining the main topic and a so what to describe that topic, map the passage structure, and paraphrase what's already there. The evidence is very findable. You can highlight and underline it directly in the reading material. Second is questions focusing on the why. Why does the author mention this detail? Why was this passage written at all? These questions are a step up from the what because you're no longer just locating information, you are identifying the purpose behind it. To do well here, you need a solid grip on the what question first, especially passage structure. When you know how a passage is built, you can understand the role each piece of information plays, and that is exactly what the why questions are testing. Third, questions focusing on the how. What can be concluded from the given information? What textual or quantitative evidence supports or undermines a claim? These questions ask you to go beyond the material. But here's the catch. You cannot go very far. You need to stay closely anchored to the passage. That means correctly understanding what the author is claiming and sometimes why they choose a specific piece of evidence to make that claim. From there, the how breaks into two types. You either are asked for inference, twist the wording carefully. Remember to watch for negatives and double negatives because your job is to find the conclusion that must be true based on what is written. The second type, you are asked to find evidence to support or undermine a claim. You need to know how to select the right textual evidence, like a finding or a quotation, or quantitative evidence by reading and extracting data from a chart or a table to back up or challenge a given claim. And here's the bigger picture. These are not just SAT reading skills. The ability to draw sound conclusions and build evidence-based arguments is something you will use really well beyond this test. Moving forward, you will encounter one final question type, the applied one. Instead of testing each skill separately, these questions ask you to combine all three, the what, the why, and the how. In real reading context, mostly in research context, where you have to make critical comparison of different scientific opinions about the same topic, and even make your own statements based on actual evidence. There are two of these applied contexts in total. Today's lesson covers the first, the paired passage. In a paired passage question, you're given two excerpts, usually from two different scientific articles. Your job is to identify the relationship between them, how one responds to, or builds on, or pushes back against the other. The second applied context is called rhetorical synthesis, where you are given a list of notes or pieces of evidence and asked to synthesize a statement by combining those elements. But with constraint, you cannot just make any statement. It has to support a given claim. You will have a better look of this question in the next lesson. Being said, we usually recommend you to master the other previous types of questions first. One way to ensure that you have stacked up the proper skills from basic to more advanced one is to follow the Take5SAT 5-week study plan curriculum. If you find difficulties in any type of question, even after doing the quiz and homework given in each lesson, you should try to practice these questions in the domain practice feature where you can filter for these skills according to this map. Let's move on to today's lesson. Paired passages. As described previously, this question asks you to find the relationship of two passages or two main arguments made by two different authors. Generally, the paired passage question can be tackled following these 5 steps. First, identify the topic that both passages discuss. This is a good pointer to remind us how we identify the main argument of each passage in the next step. Remember that different arguments can be made about one topic as they only differ by the so what part. If you need to revise on this skill, go back to lesson 8. Let's give an example without any actual reading passage here. Both passages talk about obesity in public health research. Next step, we identify the main argument of two texts, 1 and 2. This is where they talk about the same topic differently by the so what part. Characterize the topic using different adjectives or actions. For example, both passages talk about obesity in public health. But text 1, let's say it argues about obesity is a disease which can be contributed by either natural or nurture reason. In other words, obesity is a disease either caused by genetics or by external factors like diet, etc., just like cancer. But text 2 argues that obesity is a socio-economic problem. So simply researching for medical regimens will not be effective. In other words, no matter if we research on a medical treatment to cure obesity genetically or through nutrition and supplements, it is a more systematic problem, like how lower economic class don't get access to nutritious whole food but can only resort to processed and fast food, which are the reasons behind obesity. These two passages talk about obesity in two different ways. Third, we want to identify how the two main arguments relate or how the authors respond to each other. A good tip here is to not focus on finding an exact description of the relationship, but rather to indicate roughly if they agree or disagree with each other. A lot of other relationships will stem off from these two categories. In our obesity example, we generally classify the relationship these two arguments as disagree. No need to further describe. Step 4, we eliminate answers that do not go with the same direction that we estimated, or in other words, whether they indicate an agree or disagree relationship. For example, we see the question and 4 answers for our obesity example like this. Clearly, from the previous step, we defined that the two arguments disagree with each other. Therefore, we want to look for an answer that reflects this relationship through using negative description. B and D will be eliminated since generally accurate and highly practical indicate a positive or an agreeing relationship. A and C both indicate a disagreeing relationship, but A has a more negative tone compared to C. For now, we can keep both of those answers. Finally, we work again from the specific description in the chosen answer to find the necessary evidence in the reading materials. Whether A or C is the correct answer depends on the evidence presented in the text. If text 1 presents findings that support their argument, we can go with A. For C to be correct, text 2 needs to provide some situations that the theory in text 1 doesn't apply, or to prove that text 1's theory fails to generalize for every situation. Now, let's walk through a full example following this 5-step framework. Take a look at this example, so in a few minutes to read through the text. For step 1, what is the main topic that both passages discuss? Let's skim through the first few sentences of each passage, and we can see that the first text talks about how food has to travel a long distance before ending up on our plate, and the second text talks about carbon dioxide emitted from transporting food from farm to fork. So the main topic is transporting food long distance from farm to consumption. Step 2, what is the main argument of each text? Let's find the so what for the main topic of long distance food transportation in each text. Text 1 is pretty straightforward in the last sentence, where it's listing uncounted costs, namely air pollution, global warming, ecological cost of large-scale monoculture, a lot of environmental impact it seems. We can write down the main argument for text 1 as transporting food long distance harms the environment. Text 2 might need some paraphrase work. The author technically lists down a lot of number, breaking down components, making up food miles, or like the means that food is transported, like consumer shopping trips, trucking, and air freight. But the main point can be extracted at the last sentence, saying that food transportation in total of all means account for only 1.8% of carbon dioxide emission, technically nothing. So the main argument of text 2 is simply transporting food long distance does not really harm the environment. 3, finding the relationship of two arguments is pretty clear here. They disagree with each other. One says it's bad, the other thinks it's not. Now we go through all answers to eliminate the ones that go against the directions of step 3. In this example, we eliminate answers that have positive direction, indicating that two texts agree with each other. A says strongly support, so this is positive, eliminate it. B uses the verb overstates, this is negative, let's keep it for now. C uses a more neutral positive indicator, justified, but it is still in the opposite direction, so eliminate it. D indicates a negative direction because of the phrase highly implausible, or it means unreasonable, so we also keep this answer. Now you can see why we need step 5, because we are left with two negative answers, B and D. Let's work backward to the text to identify the correct specific description of this disagree relationship. D mentions that consumers do not consider the source of their food. Be careful, you might remember something about people not thinking about where their food comes from, but that is in text 1. If you go back to text 2, you will find it says nothing about that idea. Text 2 does, however, state the food transportation accounted for only 1.8% of Britain's carbon dioxide emission, which stands in contrast to the doom and gloom environmental scenario presented in the first passage. Based on the statement, you can assume that the authors of text 2 would consider the claim in text 1 to be somewhat exaggerated or overstated. That makes B correct. Another way you can quickly solve for this question is checking for how close the answers are to the main topic and main argument. B is pretty spot on for staying close to the main topic and main arguments of the two texts, the impact of transporting food on environment. But look at D. It's actually about consumer behavior, nothing about environment. So this is completely off topic. So you can see that this 5-step framework helps you work through this question in the shortest amount of time without the need to carefully read through all the answers. Let's practice this 5-step framework with these examples. These examples showcase a more nuanced relationship of scientific debate, not simply just agree or disagree with each other. So feel free to pause and try to solve on your own first before watching the explanation. So what is the main topic of this first example? Both texts talk about the interaction between trees, but the main argument are different. Text 1 talks about trees recognize others of their own species and share nutrients through the roots and fungi system, while text 2 claims that trees are unlikely to share resources within a community because there exist both cooperative and competitive individuals. So essentially, two texts disagree with each other, but in particular, text 2 would think that text 1 simplified the complex interaction of trees to just cooperation. Read the question first. It's asking about how the ecologists in text 2 would respond to an example given in text 1. So we can eliminate answers with positive indicators that show support to how the Douglas fir trees share resources within their community, like answer D or even answer A. Between B and C, we see that B is directly against Flynn's observation in text 2 that a forest does not function like a single organism. C is in fact a correct answer because it points out an example that a species can both cooperate and compete, which not only disagree with the pure collaboration theory of text 1, but also support the shifting interaction theory of text 2. Moving on to the second example, both texts talk about positive feelings or happiness in particular. Text 1 argues that positive feelings are beneficial, while text 2 claims that intense amount of happiness can bring some disadvantage. So knowing that two texts disagree with each other might not be enough, since we see that all answers use negative indicators. We need to elaborate this disagree relationship more, and we can see that while text 1 only lists out positive benefits of happiness, text 2 essentially says that we can experience that with moderate levels of happiness, not with intense amount. So text 2 would partially agree with text 1, but disagrees when it comes to the threshold where too much happiness can offset the benefit. This is what B says, so this is the correct answer. A is incorrect because text 2 does not mention any opinions of Mark Allen Davis on negative emotions. They are only mentioned in Fredrickson's findings. C is too big of a leap, make it irrelevant to Davis's analysis. D simplifies the disagreeing stance of Davis as pure rejection of beneficial effects of happiness. He in fact only indicates that too much of it can have negative effects. Moreover, he mentions one specific field that got affected by overwhelming amount of happiness, which is creativity. This is not personal fulfillment either. Both texts in this third example talk about the effect of fiction on empathy or moral imaginations. Text 1 argues that fiction helps people connect to others by improving the ability to guess others' emotion just by looking at the other person's eyes. The main argument of text 2 says that fiction helps people improve their ability to infer the thoughts and emotions of others by looking at facial expression. But this can be used to manipulate people, not just ethical behavior. So essentially, both texts agree with each other on the benefit of fiction on improving emotional intelligence. However, text 2 will go one step extra and says that this improved ability might be used for unethical behavior, so we can rule out answers with completely positive indicators such as A and B. Because D is entirely off topic, neither passage discusses or implies anything about nonfiction. C is the only correct answer, which also agrees with the relationship we just draw for the two texts. This last example is a bit more advanced, only because it might take some time to capture the main argument of both texts, and hence the relationship between two texts might not be as clear. It's not hard to see the main topic, which is about black holes. Text 1 argues that mid-sized black holes are born in nuclear star clusters by sweeping through them to gather gas and dust. So they are talking about how black holes are created. Text 2 claims that black holes grow by eating one another. This view is based on the spin or the angular momentum of 0.7 when two black holes merge together, another data point in the LIGO-Virgo findings. So what is the relationship of the two black holes text? They both discuss how black holes grow in size, but they have two different explanations. We can say that they disagree with each other because text 1 thinks that black holes sweeps and collects gas and dust to grow in size, while text 2 thinks black holes merged to grow in size. Since all four answers have negative indicators, we have to work backwards to find the exact relationship. A is incorrect because text 1 doesn't mention spin data at all. B is also incorrect because text 1 doesn't mention a merger, only text 2 does. And C is incorrect because both texts use data from the LIGO-Virgo findings, so this is not a point of disagreement for them. Only D is correct, which makes sense because text 2 use another data point, the spin of the resulting black hole in the merger, to back up their merging theory, while text 1 doesn't use this crucial statistic. This concludes our today's lesson. As you can see, paired passages questions are more advanced, not only because they combine skills from other questions, but also because of more complicated relationships between different scientific perspectives. It might not be as simple as a pure rejection, but it can be a nuanced disagreement where both texts share common ground on the topic but diverge on the mechanism, the evidence, or the scope of their claims. Just imagine two scientists looking at the same thing and arriving at completely different conclusions, and your job is to pinpoint exactly where they split. With that being said, we encourage you to go beyond the quiz and homework in this lesson by practicing more of this type in the domain practice, filtering for the cross-text connection skill. Until next time, bye!